Here to discuss that is our panel of journalists in Washington. Yamiche Alcindor is a political reporter for the New York Times, and Caitlin Huey-Burns is a national political reporter for RealClearPolitics. Ladies, welcome. Let's get, first of all, both your reactions to these numbers. Yamiche, I want to start with you.
These numbers are remarkable. This idea that Donald Trump is really taking office with such a divided nation, and so many people feeling as though he's going to possibly hurt how people feel about each other and hurt how people feel about the government. But I think I in some ways, while I don't want to question polling or question kind of scientific ways that people are looking at this, I think that there is something to be said about the fact that there was a lot of issues with polling going into the election. And maybe some of the people that really supported Donald Trump are still hesitant to say that they're really feeling optimistic about him. We had a big problem with that going into this election. But it is, of course, I think, without a doubt, it's clear that people definitely are feeling very anxious about what happens after this.
Caitlin, what do you think?
Well, what I think is really interesting about this is that it's not really a surprise, of course, that Donald Trump is poised to take the oath of office as the most unpopular president ever, because we saw in the election both he and Hillary Clinton had unprecedented numbers in terms of their popularity. So that number was going to be low. What's really interesting, though, is that he has really done nothing to help to improve those numbers. You saw him this week, Inauguration Week, which typically in Washington is a very kind of a bipartisan week. People are usually really excited. The president-elect, has lots of different kinds of events, is meeting with people or talking to people and trying to form this kind of unity message. We haven't seen that from Donald Trump. Instead, we've seen him, feuding with Congressman Lewis on Twitter, for example. My biggest question about these numbers, though, is not only, what he does to improve them, but how much they actually matter. We saw that popularity did not necessarily factor in to people voting for him. They knew that there were people that didn't like him that voted for him. So what does this mean in terms of governing? Typically, a popularity number helps in terms of, getting support from different coalitions, and that's what he'll really need in terms of governing.
Well, Yamiche, you brought up the point earlier about the skepticism some are feeling about poll numbers. In fact, the vice president-elect makes the point that he's skeptical of polling, obviously based on some of those incorrect forecasts that came ahead of the general election. But I guess I'm wondering, Yamiche, what other barometer is there? There really is no other way to try and at least get the temperature of how voters are feeling.
There is no other way to get the temperature of how voters are feeling. I mean, I guess the only other way that we could think about, if you don't go with mass numbers, is just going out and reporting. I just moved to Washington, and my job, even though I'm going to be writing about the agencies and hoping to meet the people that are going to be making large decisions about people's lives, I really hope to also be traveling around the country and talking to people and going to small towns, and also going to the towns that voted for President Obama and then voted for Donald Trump. I think we'll know very quickly if we see in rural Pennsylvania, or if we see in Cleveland, Ohio, or we see in those cities where he won and in the cities that he took away from Democrats, that people are starting to lose faith in him. If he starts off and he doesn't bring the jobs that he promises, if he doesn't decide to build the wall, if he does other things like take away people's health care, we'll know pretty quickly, I think, with the journalists on the ground, how people are feeling.
Caitlin, what do you think about that? You're nodding your head.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's going to be the big measure of Donald Trump's presidency. You talk to voters who supported him, and certainly they supported kind of his style and rhetoric, but lots of them were looking for specific answers, particularly when it comes to jobs. Now, he has kind of had this kind of jobs campaign during the transition, if you can call it that. Kind of talking about pointing to different companies. We saw with the carrier deal and so forth, kind of this PR kind of campaign related to jobs. But the question is really if people will be actually affected by that. And Yamiche brings up a great point. People will see that really soon. And I think the health care law and what they decide to do with it, how they repeal it, how they replace it, and so forth, the process that's going to take a long time. I think that's where you'll really see people feeling effects.
Yamiche, Vice President-elect Pence says that we're soon going to see a Mr. Trump who will be a president for all Americans. That's something we heard from Mr. Trump himself. Yet, if you look at recent events, just over the past week, for instance, the president-elect responding to Congressman John Lewis, who said that he didn't believe Mr. Trump's presidency was a legitimate one. it doesn't seem to necessarily be all that different from what we saw on the campaign trail. What do you think about that? Is there sort of a window here of opportunity, Yamiche, for reaching out and trying to get to those folks who didn't necessarily support Mr. Trump ahead of the election?
It's going to be really tough for Donald Trump to convince the people who didn't support him to then somehow start to back him. Even though Mike Pence says that Donald Trump is going to be a president for all, that's going to be a fact. He's going to be sworn in. He's going to be the president of all of America. However, if we are waiting for Donald Trump at all to change his tone, to get off of Twitter, to somehow become maybe a more moderated person, to be someone who is more reserved, I just don't think that's going to happen. For more than a year now, people have been waiting for Donald Trump to become someone that he's not. He's going to continue to be someone who's brash, someone who doesn't care about political correctness, someone who really is there to break the mold in Washington. And that's going to mean he's going to be making people uncomfortable on both sides of the aisle. And I'll add that he's someone who's a fighter. He's someone that if you talk about Donald Trump and he doesn't like what you said about him, he's going to come out and he's going to be very clear about his dislike for you. So case in point, even if it's John Lewis, and this is someone who most people on both sides of the aisle see as an American hero, if you call him illegitimate and you think that he's someone who doesn't deserve to be president, he's just going to say exactly what he's thinking. And I think that also goes for on the international stage when he starts getting into fights with leaders of China or leaders of other countries or Germany. I think we're going to be able to see on Twitter in real time him arguing with people and him really voicing his opinions in real time.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating to watch that. All right, I want to shift gears now.